Welcome everybody to the Policy and Finance Committee meeting here on June 10th, 2025. I will now call this meeting to order. Before we get into the action of the day, I would ask everyone to take a quick look at the minutes if you haven't already had a chance, and I would always accept a motion to approve or make any changes if necessary.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. With that, we're going to get to why we're here today. This is a little different than some of our meetings in that we are holding this one to focus on one issue, and that is the update to our anti-discrimination policies. I think the way we're going to do this is I'm going to have a few things to open up here with, kind of recap where we're at, give either of you an opportunity to say anything before we get started. If you so choose, we'll turn it over to the city attorney in case she wants to correct anything I say wrongly or rightly, we'll see. And then we'll just kind of dive into the document and go through it to take a look at where it stands now. And then when we are done with this document, if we push it out, remember this is not a final decision by any means. This will still go back to the governing body for further discussion, consideration, passage or non-passage. So that's where we're at. We got here today because this was unanimously sent back to us by the council to make changes. I think there was a pretty clear message that said we appreciate the work that staff did. We understand why they did some of it, but no, we need you guys to scale it back a little bit. I will remind folks, just because we continue to get emails, and this is not a statement good, bad, or indifferent, but the city has not actually had a DEI director position for more than a year. We now have a community engagement office, which does a whole breadth of things, working with the communities across the city of Topeka. And the federal dollars that started this conversation that we are talking about don't go towards those efforts. They go towards things like infrastructure, housing, and other areas that are critical to how people live on a daily basis within this city. So these are important dollars. But a reminder, and I think this message came out pretty clear from the governing body, our goal here is not to be reactionary to any federal administration. It is about making sure that our ordinances are up to date with federal law, and there have been some actual court decisions, as we'll talk about, particularly as it relates to affirmative action, that we just haven't updated our ordinances on, and we need to do that. We have provided copies to you folks today. There's also a few, if anyone's here in the audience who'd like to see a couple copies, and we'll put them online just to give everybody an idea of the memos we're getting as a city from places like the Department of Transportation, HUD, the Office on Violence Against Women, Homeland Security, and others. These are all departments that give us as a city support and dollars. These are just to show you the challenge in front of us. But as a reminder, and again, I think the message that came clear from the council is we're here to tackle these challenges. But that means finding the balance between the integrity of our city and ensuring that many in our city don't lose the help that they need. And I think we can do that. The city attorney and I did meet. We went through this document line by line, listening to the council members, listening to the feedback we got, and to the community and the citizens who came and have sent us emails or spoke at the council meeting and gave us their input. And our focus was kind of on two things. The first was, again, making sure that our ordinances are just up to date with current laws. Again, as you'll see in much of this document now, this primarily relates to issues around affirmative action mandates that we place on contractors and others who do work with the city. And whether you are on the side of liking it or not liking it, doesn't matter. The Supreme Court has ruled on that, and so we have to be in compliance with those Supreme Court rulings. And so that is, you'll see a lot of redactions on that area that are very specific to making sure we are in line with current state and federal law and Supreme Court decisions as it relates to those affirmative actions issues. The second thing we tried to do was, just because something isn't supposed to be mandated doesn't mean we cannot continue to do it, and we should not continue to do it. So when we looked at the first draft of this, that included things like totally eliminating us tracking women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses who did work with the city. Some of those metrics that we use to make sure we're engaging contractors, make sure we are being diverse on that level, making sure we are using local contractors who check a lot of those boxes. So the original draft took out a lot of that, and to my mind, I think a lot of the councils didn't necessarily need to do that. There's no reason we can't continue to keep those definitions, keep monitoring those things, and making sure we as a city are meeting exactly sort of the values and objectives that we have as a city as we move forward on those. So we really did try to, I hope, I'm not going to say we got it all right because that's probably not accurate, but our goal, city attorney and my goal was to really just scale it back to the absolute bare bones necessity of what we think needs to be accomplished to get us up to date and to make sure that we're keeping the city in line with things we need to do to not lose those dollars, but also, again, in listening to everybody, whether that was elected officials or community members, retain all of those things that we heard very clearly are important to everyone. So that's where we're at and why we're here today. With that, I don't know if either of you would like to make any comments before we get started. Councilmember Miller.
Thank you very much. I just want to second the thought that you just spoke about. That was rude. I just want to second the thought that you just spoke about when it comes to the values of our city, making sure that we don't change who we are. Some affirmative action language may be adjusted a little bit, but we are, as a city, as a council, continue to support everyone who is in our community, regardless of their race, sex, religion, doesn't matter at all. We may adjust some language, but just like you said, our city does not change. We do not change our thoughts. We are for everybody, and I want to make sure that this meeting continues with that in mind. Thank you.
Anyone to add, Councilmember Hope?
No, I'm good. Let's jump into it.
All right. One other comment I want to make before I turn it over to the city attorney. One of the discussions she and I had with others is there is a difference between affirmative action and equal opportunity, both not just in general, but also in legal definitions. And I think the first draft sort of kept them together as if they were the same thing in terms of eliminating stuff and deleting some items. And so we went back and made sure that anything that also applied to equal opportunity stayed in this document versus the affirmative action piece because they are different, and there is a very important distinction between those two. So we also did very much try to preserve that in this new draft. So with that, I will turn over to the city attorney for one, if she has any comments, and two, if not, we'll go from there and dig into this thing.
No, Chairman. As you said, you asked me to go through and what is the bare minimum, and my role is simply to advise you on the legal pros and cons, and you are the policy makers, so I'm happy to answer any questions as we go.
That's how lawyers politely say, if you make the wrong decisions, I try to tell you, all right? That's why they're good lawyers.
I am not the policymaker. I simply give you the pros and cons.
No, we appreciate it. Thank you. So we have both copies in this packet or just the new copy? Okay, no, never mind. That was other stuff. All right, well, I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Would you like me to go through the version you worked on that's in everybody's packet initially, or what
No,
version?
I'd like us to just go with the quote-unquote new version.
Okay.
Which that's why I was asking. That's the only one in our packet, correct?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So I want to make sure we weren't looking at the wrong document.
So as the chairman said, there are packets for members of the audience that want to look at it, as well as any members of the public that do give some background and overview of the memos we're getting from the federal government, from places like the Department of Transportation, the Attorney General's office, that make it clear their view of discrimination, which is pretty expansive and goes back in time a bit. Sorry, I am keeping strictly to the facts here. But one of the things that we have to do is when we certify for federal funds, there are requirements that ultimately the employee that certifies that we are going to accept these grants, that would be the city manager, that the city manager is certifying that we are in legal compliance and will agree to grant terms. These also apply when you apply for grants. And so the online applications won't let you move through the process until you certify that you will agree with these terms. So in the memo that I gave you, I included the terms that we are seeing that are now standard in all grants. Federal law does give lots of discretion to the executive branch to put terms and conditions on grants. There is a regulation that comes from actually the Biden era that allows an executive branch to terminate a grant if they feel like the award is no longer in the interest of the administration. So that gives a lot of flexibility to cancel grants. That being said, there's things that are constitutional and things that are not. So what we've tried to do is thread that needle of where is there potential exposure, where is there not. And to the chairman's point, the Supreme Court has looked at affirmative action. There is not a definitive court case that says we have to eliminate it at our level. However, they did come out with a case looking at Students for Fair Admission versus Presidents and Fellows of Harvard College, where the Supreme Court did strike down affirmative action in the educational system. That court case is what the Department of Justice and the other branches of the executive branch are using to say affirmative action is gone, and you must certify that you do not have any program that favors one race over another race, such as affirmative action or DEI. And so using that principle, that's one of the things that we directly have to certify that we don't have. They've also sent out memos from the Department of Justice explaining that they are advocating that citizens and fellow people use the False Claims Act to report cities that certify that they do not have these programs if they still have them on the books. The False Claims Act has treble damages and significant penalties. It also can bar you, if you're found guilty of it, bar you from ever getting federal funds again. So it has some pretty severe penalties, and the Department of Justice under Attorney Bondi has sent out a very in-depth memo encouraging false claims. They have also already sent letters to places like Chicago for statements that the mayor has said about being happy to have diverse people in his administration and opening investigations. So they are being very aggressive looking at these things. That kind of gives you the framework of how we tried to thread the needle, and you'll tell us if we got it right and you'll tell us if we got it wrong. So jumping right in, all of these grants require that we certify that we don't have any illegal DEI. Diversity, equity, inclusion is not illegal on its face at all. What they view as illegal DEI is if you do programs that prioritize one particular group of people, be it disabled individuals, be it women, be it men, whoever, regardless, if you're the majority or the minority, if you prioritize in their view one or the other, that is what they consider illegal DEI. Equal opportunity is still the law. Everyone should have an equal opportunity under the law. Everyone should have an equal opportunity for jobs. So we tried to strike that balance. To the chairman's point, the city manager does not currently have an office of DEI. He has the Office of Community Engagement. So we did strike the provision that we have a chief DEI officer, as the city does not currently have one. And that seems to be a trigger word for the current administration. Moving down into the next policy statement, our prior ordinances did, to the chairman's point, mix affirmative action and equal opportunity together. I don't know why they did it a billion years ago, but they did it, and they mixed it together. So what we've tried to do is break that out and make it clear that the policy of the city is to provide everyone an equal opportunity when employing individuals, that our policy is to not discriminate against anyone based off a protected class. The administration in their grant proceedings have lots of statements that we have to agree with Executive Order 14168 on gender ideology. The executive order tries to eliminate any reference other than to sex, which is what the statute said. And talking with the chairman, though, we do have Supreme Court cases that sex includes gender identity and sexual orientation. So to help make that clear that that's still the policy of the city, is that we believe in following Supreme Court precedent and that we believe that sex discrimination includes gender identity and sexual orientation. We suggested an amendment to the code that says per United States Supreme Court in Bodstack versus Clayton County, Georgia. Just tie it straight to the Supreme Court. There can be no argument that we are discriminating or in violation of executive order for following Supreme Court rules. Moving to page 2. On the general objectives of the city.
Sorry, Amanda, real quick.
Sorry.
I'll just tell either person, if you have questions, ask them as we're going through it. You don't have to hold them till you can ask them at the end too, but instead if we get 5 pages in, you're like, wait, feel free to go ahead. You don't need to wait for me to recognize you. Feel free to just ask.
Okay. And so we really did try to, also you see we added ancestry. That's because that's one of the protected classes that's recognized. So we thought we should have all of the legally protected classes from federal law in there. So that was an addition because it's a recognized protected class. Moving on to page 2, this is where our prior ordinance put into place affirmative action provisions, which were required at the time by executive orders. You know, there were executive orders in place that required affirmative action. It required us to have these affirmative action policies. Those were never required by federal law. Those were required by executive order for 50 years. The current president has repealed those executive orders requiring those affirmative action provisions, and then has, like I said, sent out memos saying that they will view those as discriminatory discrimination. And so what we have tried to do is tie back to the principles of the city, that it's the objective of the city to develop processes for monitoring application flow, firing, or final hiring, disposition of all applicants in accordance with the Equal Opportunity Law. That just because affirmative action provisions might not be in here doesn't mean that it's still not the policy of the city to have procedures to make sure that all applicants, regardless of protected class, are treated equally in the hiring process. We do recommend striking the language on page 2 in line 37 through 42 that says we will intensify efforts to recruit applicants within a protected class for every level, that will develop specialized training programs for people within protected classes, and that we will monitor the application flow of of people within protected classes. On the third one, we think we should monitor the application flow of everyone, regardless of protected class. On the first and second, it would be our recommendation that you eliminate those, because these seem to speak to prioritizing one group of people over another, which the administration has made it clear they view as a violation of grant terms. On moving down onto C, on line 43, we thought it important to make it clear that the city manager and department heads do have a responsibility to make sure that the city's complying with equal opportunity when employing individuals within departments. That we should make sure that department heads and the city manager are ensuring that all individuals have an equal opportunity to compete for employment and to be employed at the city. We did suggest that you strike the language about using affirmative action to do so. And we also struck the language about the Office of DEI Equity Inclusion doing that, since we recommended eliminating that provision on the prior page.
I'll just add two quick things. Obviously, we didn't include all the law as it relates to equal opportunity law, the things you can and can't do within that. And I will say this captures all that. So if you read through the equal opportunity laws, there are some of these things you can do within that training, develop, that obviously we just didn't just add those all in, saying they're already within the equal opportunity law and you can use that. I'll also say last week, for anyone who was paying attention, while it wasn't specific to this issue, there was a 9-0 Supreme Court decision relating to an employment law case that was a protected class case, and that was a 9-0 decision. So in this day and age, that's pretty remarkable in and of itself. But so that also touched on some of this that was taken into account. So just wanted to add those two things.
On page 3 in line 56, this is on the reporting. Our prior ordinance required that the Human Resources Director or their designee comply with the Equal Opportunity Act. That's required by federal law, and affirmative action reporting. Affirmative action reporting was required by federal executive order until the current administration. It's no longer required. However, we do have equal opportunity reporting that is mandatory. We do have to report on ethnicity of applicants. We do have to report on those kind of things. And so we want to make sure that that's still in the code, to be clear that that is being looked at and made sure that all employees are being treated equally. On line 62, the DEI officer was designated as our equal opportunity officer. It was the Human Resources Director for years, then it was changed for the Office of DEI when we had that office. If we don't have that, we recommend that you change that back to the Human Resources Director. Going down to line 68, in the original ordinance we presented to you, we recommended striking reporting because the thought was, what are you going to report on if we can't mandate some of this stuff? To the chairman's point, we can still report on anything we want to report on to groups. We can track what we want to report. We can see where we are at. We can make sure that we are doing metrics internally. So we recommended leaving in the reporting of failure to implement the equal opportunity policy to the governing body, city manager, human relations commissions, and make recommendations. If someone sees that we are not treating one particular classification of people equally, there should be a way to report that. On line 75, we recommend striking affirmative action, but leaving all the equal opportunity language.
And I'll add on the tracking piece. I don't think it's not just important, I don't think, for us to have that information so we kind of have a better idea of what we're doing, but there are other grants in the world, including federal agencies right now, that ask for that information. So it isn't just the right thing to do for us to monitor that. There are other dollars available at times from programs that are going to say, do you have that information? And if we've stopped tracking it, we won't be able to provide that either. So that's also a piece of this.
On page 4, line 76 through 79, we would recommend striking that language. You can continue to recruit in areas where you are going to naturally increase your workforce with people that we need to make sure that our workforce looks representative of our community. While we can do that, it would be my recommendation that it would be safer to not have that in our city code specifically, that we have a goal of finding applicants within a protected class. Our goal should be to find all applicants. If you go look for them in areas where you're more likely to find one classification of a person or another, that's perfectly acceptable under the law, but the recommendation would be maybe don't have it in the code. And then on line 76, the memos from the Department of Transportation and the Department of Justice make it pretty clear that we should not have a goal of recruiting particular people. Moving to page 5, on line 112 would be the only change there. Before, the Human Relations Commission reviewed quarterly affirmative contracted reports and reporting concerns. We can't require certain affirmative action plans anymore of contractors. We are already seeing some pushback in contracts on that. However, they can continue to review reporting. So we can report on whatever we want to report. When someone signs up in our bidding system, they have the opportunity to ARC if they're a women or minority-owned business. They have the opportunity to self-disclose those kind of things. They have the opportunity to self-disclose their own non-mandatory affirmative action that they are doing. So I believe that you could leave in here quarterly contract reporting without specifically saying it's affirmative action reporting. On page 6, line 124 through 126, we would recommend that you take out the affirmative action provision for public contracts as being incorporated by reference. If you would like to leave affirmative action in, we can try to litigate that. I don't think we will be successful with the current Supreme Court. They have struck down affirmative action in the college sphere and other spheres, and it does not seem like that is something we would be likely to win if you wanted to include that. On page 133, or line 133 through 138, that defines what an affirmative action program is. I think you can have equal opportunity programs where you work to encourage applicants of all backgrounds to apply for jobs, but I think it is a very legally risky strategy to continue to call that affirmative action programs, especially when you specifically call out recruitment efforts, employment upgrades, rate of pay. So all of those are specifically to eliminate the affirmative action language. On page 7, line 156 and 157, emergency requisition of goods and services. That was simply a change asked for by the Contracts and Procurement Division because they consider these contracts and apply the rules to them regardless. So they thought that was just a technical change that had nothing to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. On line 163 through 167, that is also the same factor. They treat goods and services not exceeding $15,000 as contracts. So the Contracts and Procurement Department, for consistency with their rules and regs, wanted that language struck. Again, has nothing to do with federal changes. To the chairman's point on line 8, you'll see that there is a lot of language back in from the original draft. We can continue to define what is a disadvantaged business, what is a minority business. The fine line seems to be we can define it, we can track it, we can make things that are non-mandatory, and if a change in administration comes and we can put these kind of programs back in place, it's still in the code and says what they are and explains that.
Yeah, and that was part of it. I mean, I saw no reason to remove any of that, just, for a lot of reasons that we don't have to go into now, but yeah.
On page 9, line 191 and 92, we simply struck who has 4 or more employees because we make everybody that's a subcontractor regardless of their number of employees. So that was a technical change. You'll see a lot of strike-throughs in the next several pages. So page 9 and 10, these were specifically our affirmative action provisions, which again used to be required by federal executive order, and that executive order has been repealed. As the administration is specifically looking for affirmative action programs, having these in the code while we certify that we do not have these programs would be very legally risky. So it also increases your risk of False Claims Act being filed, which can be filed by any citizen if they look at our code and say, well, hey, why did you certify that if you still have affirmative action programs? So we would recommend that you strike your affirmative action programs from a legal standpoint. And those go all the way to page 11. So all of those were our formerly required affirmative action programs that the federal government has changed their position on. And then on line contract conditions, line 256 through 259, we thought for consistency, we should have all the same protected classes that we have at the beginning. So this was a cleanup of making sure that all the protected classes are the same, that they read the same in our code no matter where they are. And we do include gender identity and sexual orientation per the United States Supreme Court and Bostock in there, tying it again to the Supreme Court to make it clear. On page 12, on 263 is the next change, and we recommend you strike the words, including implementation of the affirmative action program submitted in connection with the contract. That references the provisions we've recommended you strike from the last 2 pages. So if those programs don't exist, that language would need to be stricken. On page 12 at the bottom, the next change is in 281 and 282. We remove gender identity above and then place it after sex to make it clear that sex discrimination includes gender identity and sexual orientation. So we should put it in the same area. Then on page 13, if you go back to on line 301, again, we were trying to use the exact same terms. Age discrimination includes actual or perceived. You don't need to call it out. We don't do that in anywhere else under our code. And then again, we added, while we struck gender identity, we added it back in under sex as well as sexual orientation, which originally was not included in this section. So we've added that in. And that would be a review of the ordinance as proposed by the chairman.
Like I said, I think we struck a lot of what was struck, if that makes any sense, from the original version, and really did make an effort. I'm not gonna say we got it perfect or all the way right, but we really did try to strip it down to what we thought was the quote-unquote bare minimum of what was necessary at this point, and keep the integrity of everything else of what we're trying to do as a city and as we move forward. So that's what we've got. Any initial thoughts, questions, concerns? Random comments?
Jared, no, I appreciate the city's effort, you and the city's effort in moving a little language around. Extremely important that we said multiple times while you were talking that the guts of what we are doing is still the same. We're continuing the path that we set when we made all of these a long time ago. I wouldn't say a long time ago, but fairly recently. So as long as we don't go much or any further really than this, I think I'm comfortable with where it is right now. Obviously, we'll get to the governing body and be able to have everybody give their final vote and thought, and that will give the time for the public to be able to give their thoughts as well. The community input on this is extremely important. Because our decisions need to be weighed with the public's thoughts and opinions. So I'm good with it right now. I appreciate it.
Comments, Councilmember Hofer?
I'm good with it as it stands. We went through it fairly fast, so I'm going to read a few more times, but I do appreciate the section where, or the multiple sections where we coordinated and used the same wording every time and added in the line about the Supreme Court case. I think that protects us pretty well and covers everything we need to. Gets every group in there that should be covered. So at this point, I'm good.
So before we make any decisions, this committee does offer public comment. We didn't have anyone sign up. I don't know if there's anyone here, but if there's anyone here who would like to make any public comment, you can stand up now and come to the podium. Just a reminder, if you do, we have the same rules here as we do at the city council meetings, so 4 minutes and say what you want to say or need to say. So if there is anybody in the room, this is your chance. And if not, that's all right too. No? Nobody? All right. I will say with the other thing too is I'm going to make sure that obviously these meetings are recorded and they are posted online.
Oh, wait a minute.
Well, look at that. It's like she was new. Would you like to make public comment?
Yes,
All right.
Would you like a second to catch your breath?
I did it. Thank you. Hi, Danielle Twinlow. Thank you for allowing time. I really appreciate the changes that we saw within the new ordinance that I think are much more reflective of what we want to see. I do want to bring some caution and to think about the fact that, yes, while we have these values as a city, that is the current feeling of the current governing body. That we also need to be mindful of the language as this makeup of governing body might change. The city manager, we know at least 2 city council members, and that we want to be really specific so we're not having to come back to this every time executive orders get shut down or a city council member changes, which is why I'm leery of using things like goals instead of having things in there, because those values might change. So looking at that language of, if we're looking at ways to make sure that we're keeping equal opportunity, and I've heard the monitoring piece, that there's very, very easy way to add language that talks about keeping track, monitoring for target populations, target areas of town where these loan procurements are, target populations of people we're missing in hiring practices or business contracts. So there's definitely ways that we can be keeping data and looking at those missing pieces by using some of that language. That is language that is being used at a state level. In our state entities are using that kind of monitoring system, looking at ways that, okay, if we're keeping track in hiring processes and we're keeping track in loan procurements, where are we missing? Where's the gap with these numbers, right? And that's really just making sure we're providing that equal opportunity, and therefore then reaching out or maybe adjusting our future goals where we have a target population missing, right? And so that way it's not just a goal, but it is a standard practice that we have within that ordinance. So I think that large section or even that section in that hiring process could have a little bit more wording in it that gives us the opportunity to continue mindfully without it just being something that we hope the future governing bodies or the, whatever, who are making decisions, choose to make that a priority. And we're also not going back and forth as executive orders change or new Supreme Court rules happen. And it still kind of keeps that going. So that large section, I think, could potentially have a lot of rewording to align with what's happening at the state level as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a look at that between now and the governing body meeting. Take a look at the state language. Anyone else? All right, anything else staff wants to add?
I think you have a memo from our Department of Planning and Development. Part of the reason that this is here so quickly is we do have to sign for our next HUD funds by June 30th, or we will be out of money for Shelter Plus Care.
Yeah, so that everybody knows that this will be on the June 17th, is that the date? 17th governing body meeting. It'll be as an action item, whether they want to take action at that time, we'll see. But it'll be on there, and we will make sure, I will make sure that this meeting gets put out on my social media. Are these documents online yet? The ones we were?
The ones that we received.
Okay, where will we, can we just put those under the agenda, with the agenda stuff?
Yeah.
From today's meeting? That way we can direct people to see it there. I know it'll be on the 17th, but so they can see it early after we do this. Okay, so we'll make sure it's there so we can link to it so everyone can see, not just these changes, which are, the changes we just went through are online now. Correct. But the memos and all the supporting documentation, we'll make sure it gets online. Also, so anyone can go look at that. So I will certainly make sure I promote this so people have plenty of time to digest it, take a look at it, and be ready to come speak to us if they need to on June 17th. With that, I guess I would move to approve and send to the governing body for full consideration.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. I do really appreciate staff's work on this both times. the first time, and then taking time with me the second time to dig through it. And I really do appreciate all the feedback we've gotten from the community between when we did this and now. I definitely got emails on this, these changes when people saw them posted over the last week. So I appreciate everybody's input, and we'll make sure the community knows that this will be right back in front of the governing body in a week. So with that, anything else? We are working on another meeting. Actually, it might be set for sometime one of these days coming up as the earth turns around. July something. July 10th will be our next meeting. So there will be a few items on there and anything else the governing body sends to us. So anything else he wants to add? Random thoughts before we adjourn?
Not ones I want to share right now.
All right, with that, we are adjourned. Yeah, but those are all